my grandson moved into my home. Temporarily. 6 months later, I came back from a doctor's appointment, put my key in the front door, and realized it no longer fit. I tried it once. Then again. Behind the glass, I could see the familiar shape of my living room. William's old recliner. The blue curtains I had sewn myself. My grandson Evan's shoes beside the entryway rug. But the lock was new. Evan finally opened the door. After I knocked for nearly 5 minutes. He did not look embarrassed. He looked annoyed. "Grandma, you should have called," he said. I stared at him. Called before entering my own house? He crossed his arms. "I changed the locks because you keep losing things. It's for safety." I had not lost my keys. Not once. Then he said something worse. "The neighbors think you're staying at an assisted living place for a while." I told them not to worry. I looked past him into the home my late husband and I had spent decades building. And in that moment, I understood this was no longer my grandson needing a place to stay. This was someone trying to erase me from my own life. Before we continue, welcome to Rebecca's Justice Stories. If you believe a grandparent's kindness should never be used as permission to take control, please subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if a family member changed the locks on your home? I would also love to know where you are watching from. My name is Rebecca Clark. I was 68 years old when I learned that the most dangerous words in a family can sometimes be, "just for a little while." My home stood on a quiet street in Willow Creek, Ohio. It was not grand. It was a 2-story white house with blue shutters, a narrow front porch, and a maple tree that spread its branches across the driveway every autumn. But it was the place William and I had bought when we were young, worn out, and carrying more hope than money. William was an electrician. I worked at the Willow Creek Community Library. We saved every extra dollar we could. We repaired what other people might have replaced. We painted rooms ourselves. We drove old cars. We waited on vacations. We built our life slowly, carefully, and together. The home was not valuable to me because of its price. It was valuable because it held our life. William had installed the kitchen cabinets with his own hands. He built the bookshelves in the den. After working full shifts, he planted the maple tree when our daughter, Rachel, was still in elementary school. And when Evan was born, William stood in the living room, holding that tiny boy against his shoulder, and whispered, "This house has another chapter now." Evan had always been close to us. As a child, he spent weekends at our house. He built blanket forts in the den, played basketball in the driveway, and ate too many pancakes on Saturday mornings. William taught him how to replace a fuse and use a level. I taught him how to make chicken soup and find the quiet corner of a library when life became too loud. After William died, Evan was one of the people who helped me survive the silence. He was 27 then, working in sales for a regional construction supplier. He came by some Sundays, brought takeout, and sat with me on the porch. "You okay, Grandma?" he would ask. I would say yes. Sometimes I was. Sometimes I was not. But he stayed anyway. That was why I did not hesitate when he called me one cold February evening. "Grandma," he said, "I lost my job." His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I sat down at the kitchen table. "What happened?" "The company is cutting people. They lost a contract. And my whole department got hit." "I'm so sorry. I'm trying to find something else. But my lease ends soon. And I don't have enough for another place right now." There was a pause. Then he said, "Could I stay with you for 6 weeks? Just until I get back on my feet?" 6 weeks. That was all he asked for. I thought about the little boy who used to fall asleep with his head in William's lap while old baseball games played on television. "Of course," I told him. Come home. Evan arrived 2 days later with a rented cargo van, 3 boxes, a suitcase, and a look of exhaustion that made my heart ache. I put clean sheets on the guest room bed. I filled the pantry with food he liked. I cleared space in the garage for his tools and boxes. At first, it felt good to have someone in the house again. Evan helped carry groceries. He took the trash bins to the curb. He replaced the burned-out bulb above the porch. We ate dinner together some nights. And he told me about jobs he had applied for. For a while, I believed I was helping him heal from a bad season. Then the small changes began. The first was the mail. One afternoon, I noticed that the basket by the front door was empty. Usually, Evan brought the mail in when he got home. I asked if anything had come. No, he said. Just junk. The next day, I found 2 envelopes pushed beneath a stack of magazines on the kitchen counter. One was a grocery circular. The other was a notice from my homeowner's insurance company. I opened it immediately. It was only a reminder that my policy would renew in 60 days, but there was a handwritten note in the corner from Evan. Ask about home equity value. My stomach tightened. When he came downstairs, I held up the letter. Why did you write this? He barely looked at it. I was just thinking you should know what the house is worth. I know what my house is worth. I mean financially. You have a lot of equity here. The word equity hung in the air. I am not planning to sell. I didn't say you were. But he said it too quickly. A few days later, he suggested I let him organize my paperwork. Your office is full of files, he said. It's hard to find anything. I can find what I need. Grandma, I'm just trying to help. There was that word again. Help. The word that can mean love, when it is offered with respect. The word that can become control, when it is forced through a closed door. I appreciate it. I told him. But I will handle my own records. His smile faded. That night, I heard him walking around downstairs long after I had gone to bed. At first, I assumed he could not sleep. Then I heard the filing cabinet in the den open. I came down the stairs quietly. Evan was standing near my desk, holding a folder. He looked up sharply. What are you doing? I asked. He placed the folder back. I was looking for the Wi-Fi password. It is written on the refrigerator. Oh, he smiled, but he did not meet my eyes. I began locking my office door after that. I hated doing it. I hated the feeling that I had to protect my papers from my own grandson. I hated hearing William's voice in my mind, reminding me that kindness did not mean ignoring what I could see. But I still told myself I was overreacting. Evan had lost his job. He was stressed. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he was simply trying to make himself feel useful. Then 6 weeks passed. He had not found work. Or at least, he had not found the kind of work he wanted. He rejected a warehouse job because the hours were too early. He turned down a sales position because the base salary was lower than his old one. He spent long afternoons on the couch with his laptop open, telling me he was networking. I tried not to judge him. Job loss can shake a person. I understood that. But when I suggested he contribute something toward groceries, he laughed. Grandma, I don't have income. You have savings? Not much. What happened to the money from your previous job? He looked away. Life happened. That was all he said. 2 months became 3. 3 became 4. By then, Evan had taken over more of the house than I realized. He kept the television remote in his room. He brought friends over without asking. He parked in the garage, leaving my car in the driveway through spring storms. He began telling me not to cook dinner when he had other plans. You don't need to make a big thing, he would say. I'll grab something. One evening, Carol Jenkins came over for tea. Carol had lived across the street from me for nearly 30 years. She was a retired guidance counselor, a loyal friend, and the kind of woman who could spot trouble behind a polite smile. Evan was sitting in the den when she arrived. "Hey, Carol," he said. "Grandma's resting more these days." I looked up from the kitchen. "I am not resting more." He gave a short laugh. "You know what I mean." Carol's eyes met mine. She said nothing then. But after Evan went upstairs, she leaned closer across the porch table. "Rebecca, are you all right?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" I looked through the window toward the staircase. "He is having a hard time." That was not my question. I tried to smile. Carol did not smile back. "Has he been opening your mail?" My hand froze around my teacup. "Why would you ask that?" "Because he told me yesterday that you might be moving soon. He said you were considering more support." The porch suddenly felt too small. "I am not moving." "I know that. But he has been telling people you are thinking about it." I looked down at the flower bed William used to weed every Saturday morning. For the first time, fear reached me clearly. Not panic. Not yet. But fear. The following week, I had a routine cardiology appointment in Columbus. Carol offered to drive me because my car needed a new battery. I accepted. The appointment took most of the morning. The doctor said my heart was stable. I needed to walk more, rest well, and keep doing what I was doing. It should have been a reassuring day. Instead, when Carol brought me home, I found my key no longer worked. At first, I thought I had put the wrong key in the lock. Then I saw the new deadbolt. Carol stood beside me. "Rebecca," she said quietly. "What did he do?" I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Finally, Evan opened the door. He wore headphones around his neck. He looked irritated, as if I had interrupted him. "Grandma, you should have called." I could barely speak. "This is my house. I changed the locks for safety." "Safety from whom?" He sighed. "From anyone getting in? You're not always careful." "I have never lost my key." "Fine, but you could." Carol stepped forward. "Evan, you changed the locks on your grandmother's home without giving her a key?" He looked at her with open annoyance. "This is family business." "No," Carol said. "It became community business when you started telling the neighborhood she was in assisted living." Evan's face changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. "You told people I was in a nursing home?" I asked. "I said you were getting help?" "I was at a doctor's appointment." He shrugged. "It wasn't a big deal." Something inside me went quiet. Not weak. Not defeated. Quiet. In the way a room becomes quiet before someone finally tells the truth. "Give me a key," I said. Evan hesitated. Then he reached into a drawer by the door and handed me a new key. I took it. But I knew it was not enough. A person does not change the locks on someone else's house because they are worried about safety. They do it because they want control. That night, after Evan went out with friends, I walked to the mailbox. For months, I had allowed him to bring in the mail without thinking about it. Now I looked carefully through everything. Most of it was junk. Then I found an envelope wedged behind a catalog. It had been bent, as though someone had tried to hide it. The return address belonged to the county treasurer's office. My name was printed across the front. But below it, in bold letters, were words that made my hands begin to shake. Property tax, escrow, notice immediate response required. I went inside, locked myself in my office, and opened it. The notice stated that a lender had contacted the county to confirm property tax status in connection with a pending lien review. A lender. A lien review. My house had not been sold, but someone was using it for something. I read the name of the lending company twice. I had never heard of it. Then I saw a reference number, and beneath it, a name listed as the applicant. Evan Carter. My grandson. The same young man who had asked for 6 weeks. The same young man who had changed my locks and told the neighbors I was gone. He was trying to use my home as collateral for a loan. And I still did not know what documents he had used to make anyone believe he had the right. I did not confront Evan that night. Every part of me wanted to march upstairs, hold the tax notice in front of his face, and demand an answer. But I had learned something over the years. When people are caught before you understand the full truth, they often do not confess. They rewrite. They blame. They hide the next piece before you know it exists. So I waited until the next morning. Evan had gone out early. His bedroom door was open. His coffee cup sat in the sink, and his car was gone from the driveway. I took the tax notice, my identification, and the original deed from the firebox beneath the mantel. Then I called Charles Whitman. Charles had helped William and me update our estate documents years before William died. He was older now, with white hair and a slower walk, but his voice was still steady. "Rebecca," he said when I explained the notice. "Do not sign anything. Do not confront Evan alone if you feel unsafe. And do not allow him access to your office or financial records. Bring the notice to me." An hour later, I sat in Charles's office while he read every line of the document. "The county did not create this lien," he explained. "They received a tax status inquiry from a lender. That usually happens when someone is considering a loan secured by real property." "Can Evan do that?" "Not legally. Not without your authority. But someone may have submitted documents claiming he has that authority." I felt cold all over. Charles called the lending company while I sat beside him. He did not accuse anyone. He asked careful questions. "Attorney Charles Whitman," he said. "I represent Rebecca Clark, the sole owner of the property at 314 Willow Ridge Road. We received a tax escrow notice related to a loan application. Mrs. Clark has not applied for any loan." There was a long pause while the representative checked the file. Then Charles's expression changed. "I see," he said. When he ended the call, he turned toward me. "The loan application is under Evan Carter's name. He identified himself as your financial agent." "My financial agent?" "Yes. The file includes what appears to be a durable power of attorney." I stared at him. "I never signed a power of attorney." I told them that. "They have temporarily frozen the application." "Temporarily?" "Until they can verify the document." My hands tightened around the strap of my purse. "What else did they say?" Charles opened his notebook. "The application was for $185,000. It listed your home as collateral. Evan claimed you had moved into a senior care residence and that he was managing your affairs because you were unable to do so." For a moment, the room disappeared. I saw only Evan standing in my doorway, with his arms crossed. "The neighbors think you're staying at an assisted living place for a while." He had not been making an awkward excuse. He had been building a story. Every comment about me resting more. Every piece of mail he handled. Every neighbor he told that I was being cared for somewhere else. He was trying to make it believable that I no longer lived in my own home. "Is the loan approved?" I asked. "Not yet," Charles said. "The title company required additional verification. That is likely why the county inquiry happened. The lender wanted to confirm tax status before the closing process moved forward." "Closing?" Charles nodded. "The paperwork shows a proposed closing date in 11 days. 11 days. My grandson had less than 2 weeks before he planned to put a loan against the home William and I built." Charles continued. "There is more. The file includes a notarized power of attorney." My mouth went dry. A notary saw me sign something? That is what the document claims. I never signed anything. I believe you. But we need to find out who notarized it and what identification was used. Charles contacted the county recorder's office, the title company, and the lender's fraud department. He sent written notice that I disputed Evan's authority and that I was living independently in my own home. Then he looked at me carefully. Rebecca, I would also like you to consider staying somewhere else for a few nights. The thought of leaving my home because Evan had made me afraid hurt more than I could explain. This is my house. I know, Charles said gently, and it will remain yours. But until we know what he has access to, I want you to be safe. I thought of Carol. I called her from Charles's office. She did not hesitate. You are staying with me, she said. And Evan is not getting one more quiet night to decide what he can take from you? That afternoon, Charles arranged for a locksmith to meet us at my house. Carol and I arrived first. Evan's car was in the driveway. My stomach tightened. I had hoped he would be gone, so I could change the locks without confrontation. But perhaps there was no more avoiding it. Charles stood beside me on the porch. Carol was behind us. The locksmith waited near his van with a clipboard. I used the new key Evan had given me. It worked. The door opened. Evan was standing in the hallway. His face changed when he saw Charles. "What is this?" he asked. I stepped inside. "This is my attorney." Evan looked past me at the locksmith. "Why is there a locksmith here?" Charles spoke before I could. "Mr. Carter, Rebecca Clark has disputed a loan application that identifies you as her financial agent. We are here to make sure her home and personal records are secure." Evan's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." I held up the tax notice. "This says you are using my house as collateral." He stared at it. Then he looked at me. "Grandma, I can explain." "No," I said. "You can answer." He took a step closer. "I wasn't going to hurt you." "You changed the locks?" "It was for safety." "You told my neighbors I was in assisted living." "I said you were getting help." "You redirected my mail?" "I was trying to keep things organized." "You applied for a $185,000 loan against my home?" He looked toward Charles. His jaw tightened. "It was not final." "That is not an answer." Evan ran a hand through his hair. "I lost my job. I had debt. I thought I could use the house to consolidate everything, get some breathing room, and then pay it off." "With what income?" "I was close to getting a new job." "Close is not the same as having one." He looked at the floor. "I thought if I could get through the next few months, nobody would know." I felt something in my chest break. Not because of the money. Because I remembered the phone call when he asked for 6 weeks. I remembered the way I filled the pantry. The way I put clean sheets on the guest room bed. The way I believed I was offering him a safe place. And he had looked around that safe place and seen an asset. "You plan to use my house to pay your debts?" I said. "I plan to protect us." "There is no us in a plan that requires you to lie about where I live." He looked up at me. For a moment, he seemed young again. Lost. Ashamed. The boy who once sat at my kitchen table with syrup on his cheek. But then he said, "You don't understand how hard it has been." The pity I almost felt disappeared. "I understand hardship." I said, "Your grandfather and I knew what it was to have bills on the table and not enough money in the bank. We knew what it was to work extra hours and still be afraid. But we did not steal security from people who loved us." "I didn't steal anything." "You tried to borrow against my home without my permission." "It is only a loan." "My home is not your emergency fund." The room went silent. Charles stepped forward. "Evan, you need to leave the property today." You may take personal belongings under Rebecca's supervision. You are not authorized to access her office, her mail, her records, or any bank or legal accounts. Any further contact about the property must come through my office. Evan stared at him. You're kicking me out? I looked at my grandson. I gave you 6 weeks. You took 6 months and tried to take more. His face crumpled. I have nowhere to go. The words hurt me. They hurt because I still loved him. But love is not a reason to stay where someone is unsafe. You can call your mother, I said. You can call your friends. You can go to a shelter if you have to. Charles can give you information about local resources. But you cannot live in my home while you are trying to use it against me. Evan began to cry. I cried too. Not because I doubted my decision, because some decisions are right and still break your heart. He packed through the afternoon. Carol sat with me in the kitchen, while Evan moved boxes from the guest room to his car. The sound of drawers opening and closing traveled through the house. At one point, he came downstairs, carrying an old photograph of himself and William. Can I take this? He asked. I looked at it. William stood beside a teenage Evan in the garage. Evan was holding a small wooden birdhouse they had built together. Both of them were laughing. You can take a copy, I said. The original stays here. Evan nodded. For the first time all day, he did not argue. Before he left, he placed a small set of keys on the counter. Those are the old copies, he said. I had 2 more made. Charles took them. Thank you, he said. We will still replace every lock. Evan looked at me. I'm sorry. Grandma? I wanted the apology to make everything easier. It did not. I hope you mean that someday, I said. But you need to tell the truth first. He nodded once and walked out. The locksmith changed every exterior lock before sunset. As the new deadbolt clicked into place, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. The lock was not what made the house safe. The truth did. That evening, Charles received an email from the lender's fraud department. They had placed the loan application on hold and requested an internal review, but there was something else. The notary information on the power of attorney did not match any current commission record in the county. The stamp belonged to a notary whose commission had expired more than a year earlier. Charles looked at me over the top of the printed email. This suggests the document may be fraudulent, he said. I thought of Evan's words. It is only a loan. But a person does not use an expired notary stamp by accident. A person does not change locks, intercept mail, invent an assisted living story, and tell a lender. A grandmother cannot manage her own affairs by accident. This was not desperation by itself. It was planning. And I had a feeling that if Evan had found someone willing to help him create the paperwork, then the truth would be bigger than one forged document. The next morning, Charles called with another update. The lender had provided a copy of the application package. There was a name listed as the referral contact, a man Evan had never mentioned to me, Grant Hollowell. And beside that name was the name of the company that had helped prepare the loan file, Hollowell Property Solutions. The same company whose business card I had found 2 months earlier inside Evan's jacket pocket. At the time, I assumed it was from a job interview. Now I understood. Evan had not been looking for work. He had been looking for a way to turn my home into money. And somewhere between the changed locks, the hidden mail, and the forged power of attorney, he had found people willing to help him try. Grant Hollowell's business card sat on my kitchen table for most of the morning. Hollowell Property Solutions. The name sounded harmless. Professional. The kind of name printed on signs near highways. Promising fast cash. Easy closings. And relief from difficult situations. But I had seen the file. A forged power of attorney. An expired notary stamp. A loan application claiming I lived in assisted care. A plan to put $185,000 of debt against a home Evan did not own. There was nothing harmless about that. Charles contacted the lender's fraud department immediately. He also forwarded the documents to the county recorder and the investigator assigned to financial exploitation cases involving older adults. No one promised me instant justice. That was not how the real world worked. The lender froze the application. The county recorder placed a fraud alert on my property record. The investigator opened a case and asked Charles to preserve every document, message, and envelope connected to Evan's plan. It was not dramatic. It was slow. It was paperwork, phone calls, signature, and careful questions. But after months of Evan acting as though I could be pushed aside by one locked door, I found comfort in the process. The truth was being written down. A week later, investigator Lena Morales came to my house. She was calm, observant, and direct. She asked me about the 6-week arrangement, the missing mail, the changed locks, the false assisted living story, and the tax notice. I told her everything. I did not exaggerate. I did not call Evan names. I simply described what happened. At the end, she asked, "Did your grandson ever have permission to apply for a loan using your home?" "No." "Did you ever sign a power of attorney authorizing him to manage your property or finances?" "No." "Did you ever tell him you were moving into assisted living?" "No." She nodded and wrote for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Clark, I need you to understand this. You did not cause this by being kind. Your grandson made choices. We are investigating those choices." I had not realized how badly I needed to hear that. For months, I had kept asking myself what I had done wrong. Had I given him too much? Had I missed signs because I wanted to believe the best? Had I made him dependent by saying yes when he needed help? Maybe I had been too trusting. But trust was not the crime. The crime was what he chose to do with it. Investigator Morales explained that Hollowell Property Solutions had appeared in other complaints. Not all were criminal cases. Some involved people facing foreclosure or debt who signed documents they did not understand. Others involved misleading promises about property sales or financing. Evan had found Grant Hollowell online after falling behind on credit cards and a personal loan. He had originally contacted the company about consolidating his own debt. Grant told him that if Evan could show control over a property with substantial equity, he could get funding quickly. Evan told them about my home. At first, he claimed I had agreed to help him. Then, when the company asked for proof, he made the situation worse. He told them I was in declining health. He said I had moved into care. He claimed he was handling my affairs. And eventually, he used false paperwork to support the story. The investigator asked whether Evan had created the forged document himself or received help. "I don't know," I said. "That is what we will determine." 3 days later, Evan asked to meet. He did not call me directly. He sent a message through Charles. "I would like to explain. I know I do not deserve it. But please let me speak to Grandma." I read the message in my kitchen, with Carol sitting across from me. "You don't owe him a meeting," she said. "I know." "Then why are you considering it?" I looked toward William's photograph on the mantel. "Because I need to hear whether he is sorry for what he did, or only sorry that he was stopped." Carol nodded slowly. "Those are not the same thing." "No," I said. "They are not." We met at Charles's office. Evan arrived alone. He looked different from the young man who had opened my front door and told me I should have called before entering my own home. His hair was unwashed. His shoulders were rounded. He could not look directly at me when he sat across the table. Charles remained in the room. So did Investigator Morales. Evan understood why. "I want to tell the truth," he said. Then tell it, I replied. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he began. After losing his job, Evan had used his savings faster than he admitted. He had kept up appearances with friends. He had continued paying for his truck, his gym membership, restaurant tabs, and expensive habits long after he could afford them. When his credit cards filled and loan payments came due, he panicked. He tried looking for work, but not as hard as he let me believe. He wanted a job that restored the lifestyle he had lost. He did not want to begin again from the bottom. Then he found Grant Hollowell's website. Grant said there were ways to use family property to get through a rough patch. Evan said. What did you tell him? I asked. At first, I said you might help me. Might help you? He swallowed. I said you were alone. I said you had a big house and no one needed it. The words hurt, but they did not surprise me anymore. Then he asked if I had power of attorney. Evan continued. I said no. He told me it would be hard without it. What happened next? Evan looked down at his hands. I found an old copy of your signature in the office. My breath stopped. He had entered my office after all. I used it to make the document look real, he said. Grant's office sent me a template. Someone connected to them notarized it. Charles's face hardened. Did Grant Hollowell know that Rebecca had not signed it? Evan hesitated. I don't know what he knew. Did you tell him she signed it? Yes. Did you tell him she was living in assisted care? Yes. Was that true? No. The room went quiet. The truth was not complicated anymore. Evan had made a choice. Then another choice. Then another. Until he had built a lie large enough to lock me out of my own home. Why did you change the locks? I asked. His eyes filled. Grant said lenders sometimes sent someone by to check whether the owner still lived there. I thought if the neighbors believed you were gone, no one would question it. I felt Carol's hand close around mine beneath the table. You wanted people to believe I was gone. I said. I didn't think of it like that. You should have. He cried then. Not loudly. Not performatively. But I had spent enough years working at a library desk, watching children cry when they were afraid or ashamed, to know that tears alone do not tell you whether a person has changed. I was desperate, he whispered. I know. I said, but desperation explains nothing unless it leads you back to the truth. He nodded. I will cooperate. I'll give the investigator my phone. The messages. Everything. Investigator Morales looked at him. That is your choice. You should also speak with your own attorney. I know. Then Evan looked at me again. Can I come home? The question broke something inside me. He still called it home. The house where he had changed the locks. The house where he had hidden my mail. The house he nearly used to bury me under debt. But I remembered the child he had been. I remembered William's hands guiding his over a piece of wood in the garage. I remembered the boy who used to call me when he was scared of thunderstorms. I loved him. That was the truth. But love did not make this house safe for him to return to. No, I said gently. His face fell. You cannot live with me. Not now. I understand. You need to find your own place. You need to work. You need to face the debt and the people you involved. And you need to understand that an apology does not give you back access to my home, my keys, or my life. He nodded through tears. I understand. I hope someday you truly do. The investigation continued for several months. Grant Hollowell's company was reviewed by state and local authorities. The lender permanently denied the application and closed the loan file. The title company flagged the forged documents. The county recorder made sure no lien could be recorded against my property from that attempted loan. The case involving Evan and the fraudulent document did not disappear overnight. Investigators reviewed the records, the messages, and the notary information. Evan provided a statement and accepted responsibility for the false claims he had made. I did not celebrate his consequences. I did not want my grandson destroyed. I wanted him stopped. There is a difference. Charles helped me take practical steps that gave me peace. I placed a permanent fraud alert on my property record. I updated my estate plan. I changed the locks again. Even after Evan had returned every key, I installed a doorbell camera. Not because I wanted to live in fear, but because I had learned that safety can be an act of self-respect. Carol and I began walking together in the evenings. I rejoined my book club. I turned the guest room back into a room for guests, not a room for someone who believed my kindness gave him control. One Saturday, I found William's old toolbox in the garage. For years, I had avoided opening it. But that day, I lifted the lid. Inside were screwdrivers, wire cutters, a worn tape measure, and a small pencil with his initials carved into the side. Taped beneath the lid was a note in his handwriting. Rebecca, never let a broken thing convince you. It cannot be repaired. But never trust someone who keeps breaking it on purpose. I sat on the garage floor and cried. Not because I felt weak, because William was still teaching me how to see clearly. Nearly a year later, Evan came to my porch. He had called first. He stood outside with no suitcase, no boxes, and no expectation that I would invite him in. He looked healthier, older. He had found work with a local electrical supply company, starting in the warehouse. It was not the job he once believed he deserved, but he had stayed with it. I'm paying my bills, he told me. I have a roommate. I'm in counseling. I nodded. That is good. I wanted to tell you, I made my first payment toward the legal costs. That is good too. He looked at the porch floor. I know I cannot fix what I did with one payment. No, I said. You cannot. I'm not asking you to trust me. For the first time, I saw something different in him. Not self-pity. Not an excuse. Understanding. I just wanted to say thank you for not lying about me, he said. You could have told everyone I was evil. I did not need to. The truth was enough. His eyes filled. I'm sorry, Grandma. I looked at him for a long moment. I believe you are sorry, I said. Now you must keep becoming someone who does not do it again. He nodded. Then he asked, Can I hug you? I thought about the changed locks, the hidden mail, the day I stood outside my own front door. Then I remembered what boundaries were for. They were not walls built from hate. They were doors with locks. And I had the right to decide when to open mine. Yes, I said. He stepped forward slowly and hugged me. It was not forgiveness completed. It was not trust restored. It was simply the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one with truth inside it. After Evan left, I sat on the porch beneath the maple tree. The house was quiet again. Not empty. Not lonely. Mine. I looked through the front window at William's recliner, the blue curtains, and the hallway that had carried so much of my life. For too long, I thought being a grandmother meant always making room, but I had learned that making room for someone should never require making myself disappear. My home was not an asset for another person's debt. My age was not permission for someone to speak over me. And my love was not a weakness to be used against me. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Rebecca's Justice Stories, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that protecting your home, your money, and your peace is never selfish. And tell me in the comments, if you were Rebecca, Would you let Evan back into your life after he changed the locks? Or would you keep the door closed for good?